Welcome everybody to another episode of the Cannabis Review. I am delighted to be joined on this show by Stuart Lambie, who's the Secretary General of Medicinal Cannabis Europe. How are you keeping, Stuart? You well?
Yeah, thanks, Owen. Very well, thank you. You?
Excellent. I'm delighted to have you on the show now, covering a topic that I'm sure most people talk about, but very few people have an inside knowledge like you'll have on this. So, first and foremost, I just want to let everybody, if you want to inform everybody how you're in the cannabis industry in Europe and how you got to this stage now, on a quick brief.
Yeah, sure, Owen. Yeah, thanks. Well, Medicinal Cannabis Europe was started up about 3 years ago as a pro bono project, and just over a year ago we established the association as a non-profit association in Belgium under Belgian law. I think unlike a lot of associations, we're a multi-stakeholder association, so we welcome members from the patient and medical community right through to the industry. And basically our objectives are to advocate for harmonised European regulation on medicinal cannabis, create a level playing field for the industry to operate across all European countries, push for funding, for research and development funding from European funds for investigation into medicinal cannabis, and last but not least, try to educate the public, stakeholders, the medical community about the benefits of medicinal cannabis and try and get rid of the stigma, which is in some places still attached to it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks very much for that. Can you give us any fresh news that you've heard coming out of Europe in terms of councils being formed or something you can inform the audience about?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to pick up on, very recent developments. We've been working for quite some time now, about 6 months, together with various members of the European Parliament, and trying to be part of the process of bringing together an interest group in the medicinal cannabis issue. So the good news on that front is that there is now an interest group being formed within the European Parliament of several members of the Parliament from different political directions, different geographies around Europe. And an interest group in the European Parliament, for those of your audience who maybe are not that familiar with the European institutions, it's a mechanism whereby these members of the Parliament can come together around a common issue. They can pull in input from external stakeholders, so via associations like ourselves, industry can have access into that process. They can collect knowledge, information, hear about people's challenges, the barriers preventing trade or the use of the medicines, and they can digest all of that as a group of members of Parliament, and then they can take those issues forward to the European Commission, who are the regulators, who will be the ones creating any draft regulations in the future on this issue. And they can say, hey guys, these are the problems which the industry, which patients, which the medical community are facing. How are you going to fix this? How are you going to start harmonizing regulation to make these medicines available to European patients equally across all European countries? So I think the formation of that interest group is a huge step forward. And it really indicates that the parliamentarians are starting to understand the need for regulation around this issue. And that's where the process has to begin. It will not be a quick process. It will take time, but we need to start sometime. So now is as good as any. So I think that's the first fairly significant recent development.
No, work away. Continue.
Yeah. One other thing which I think is worth mentioning is Medicinal Cannabis Europe we held a conference back in October last year, and we had a member of the European Commission there from Directorate General Santé. That's the Directorate General which is responsible for public health issues. And they made it clear then that they were going to start a process of creating a glossary of definitions which could be used to describe medicinal cannabis, and that was in relation to the Herbal Medicines Directive. Now, the Herbal Medicines Directive might be a way in for the medicinal cannabis products into European regulation. And they have recently just announced that their committee, the committee looking at this, will start work in 2021, collecting views and information around definitions, how to define medicinal cannabis, because that's an absolute essential starting point for any European regulation. Is we need a clear definition of what is medicinal cannabis. Right now, there is no legal clear definition under European law, and without the definition, you can never start to regulate. So that process at least is beginning. So those two things I think are quite significant, as I say, quite recent developments in Brussels.
Yeah, well, I think we both agree the rules and the framework of any industry are paramount in ensuring that it has longevity and there's no corruption and a grey market, as opposed to defining the two markets individually. One of the things that I'd like to kind of talk to you about in this episode is harmonising the EU regulations. Us over in Ireland at the moment, it's kind of comical, the situation that's been at the moment. You've got the enactment of the law that happened with the European Council back in December. That hasn't been fully enacted over here. And I can understand the police point of view when they see a big field full of cannabis or the big plant full of cannabis. They're not to understand which is the difference between CBD and THC. So are you seeing a mishmash of implementations of these regulations across the EU like what's happening in Ireland? Or has there been a cohesive action and we're kind of the odd one out as per usual?
Well, yeah, I don't know if you're the odd one out, Owen. I don't think so. I think on this particular issue, maybe you're the odd one out. But I think in terms of harmonized view or regulation on all kinds of aspects of medicinal cannabis, it's absolutely not harmonized across Europe, and that really is the problem. Nowadays we have 27 EU member states, and in each of those member states there's a different implementation of all kinds of aspects of the regulation. Our particular focuses are on the regulation allowing an industry to operate. So again, that's very different from one country to another at the moment. You have the German model where there's a relatively clear model there and relatively clear regulation on how to do this. And there are other member states where it's absolutely prohibited to have an industry operating in the medicinal cannabis sector. Equally for patients, patient access to existing cannabis medicines is radically different from one member state to the other. Reimbursement on those medicines costs is radically different from one member state to the other. So it's all of those aspects, and the Irish CBD issue is one of those. Although it's a CBD issue, not a regulated medicine issue as such. But yeah, all of those things are in dire need of harmonization, so that at least there should be a minimum level of harmonized regulation of how these things are handled in all 27 member states. So a patient in Italy needing access to a drug for, let's say, epilepsy has the same ability to access that medicine as a patient in Spain or a patient in Ireland. Equally, those drugs should be able to move cross-border with the patient in their hand baggage, just like any other medicine would move across a border. So all those things need to be sorted out so that we have equal treatment for patients in all countries, and an industry which can operate on a level playing field across all those countries. And today that just simply doesn't exist. And your Irish CBD issue is one example of that.
Yeah, well, hopefully the people in power at Central can form these rules and these regulations that the other countries can just take it. This is how it's done, as opposed to, I can understand a lot of politicians trying to learn this as a new industry must be a lot overwhelming for them, the myriad of things they'd have to learn and how fast some things are moving. It's difficult enough when you're already at the tip of the spear of this industry, never mind trying to catch up on 15 years of learning.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think that's where, to go back to my first point about the interest group of members of parliament forming an interest group, that interest group can then listen to existing experiences on regulation in different places, what works, what doesn't work, and then hopefully channel that through and eventually be reflected in European regulation.
Yeah. Tell me this and tell me no more. I have yet to come across a proper economist's predictions of a European medical cannabis. I've seen this is what the industry looks like in 3 years' time with a rough figure thrown out there. But there's the likes of Bew Whitney over in the US, who's the head of Whitney Economics. He does them for the hemp industry. And they're as detailed a financial report as you should be getting for an industry. Have you come across a proper financial report yet, or is this something that still is yet to be done by an economist?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a little bit outside of our kind of field. We're more looking at policy and regulation rather than the economics. I mean, I think the economics.
But sure, would you not think that the economics goes hand in hand with the convincing the politicians? Because a lot of them are going to see a number and say, well, we could create X amount of jobs. Because all you're hearing coming out of New York at the moment is it's worth X amount of billion. They're doing X amount of projects to create X amount of jobs. Nobody really cares about anything else after that. And I think that should be one of the doors for the politicians. It's easy, it's digestible, it's something that they'd understand, as opposed to hitting them with all the different myriads of medical and recreational cannabis that do get hit, they get hit with.
Yeah, no, I think I've, like you, I've seen the same predictions of, X billion, this market will be worth X billion by 2030. So those are the kind of analyses I've picked up on. I think what you're talking about is something much more detailed. So you would say, what jobs how many thousands of jobs would be created around Europe, etc. And I think you're right. I think that kind of detail at the moment is lacking. At least I haven't seen it.
And even to put a figure on the industry at the moment, like how many jobs are currently in CBD in each country? What's the total revenue, GDP, or taxation for the country? So it's again, I think it's something that when the funding and the research development is being done, I think this is one of the things that needs to be looked at as carefully as this is the benefits that the plant has for everybody.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that was certainly the case in the United States. I think that's what convinced a lot of states in because of the potential tax revenues which would come from it.
Yeah, no, well, hopefully now that's something that we can maybe press on, and we'll see over the next 12 months a comprehensive financial and economy report done for both the hemp industry and then a subset for the CBD industry, because I think this information is going to be the key to us getting a fully regulated EU industry.
Yeah, sure. I think, just to pick up on your CBD point again, if I can, I think from a medicinal point of view, we are talking much wider than CBD, obviously.
Yeah.
I think CBD, the recent ruling on CBD is a kind of, it's an easy one, if you like. Although it's caused problems in Ireland, it's a relatively easy one for regulators to cope with and to take on board, because it has a connection with the wellness issues, and it's relatively soft and comfortable to deal with. People know that CBD in general is not harmful, but when you talk about medicinal products, then you're talking about CBD, THC, and many other compounds which are found in the cannabis plant. And that's where the issue of definitions becomes much more important. What do we mean when we talk about medicinal cannabis? Most likely, it's a combination of all those compounds. Maybe in terms of definitions, we need to talk about specific compounds when we come to regulate, rather than just medicinal cannabis as a blanket term.
Yeah, well, I think I couldn't agree with you more. I think medical cannabis is the equivalent of saying it's jazz. Do you know what I mean? Is it bebop? Is it modern? Is it slow? There's maybe 100 different subsets of jazz, and I think medical cannabis needs to be treated the exact same. As you said, CBD is just one of those little myriad of topics. It's just a hot topic at the moment, but yeah. Hopefully it's something we get to see more detail in each individual component of the industry and more financial reporting. I want to thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, Stuart. Very informative, and I hope we get to talk to you again before the end of the year.
Yeah, my pleasure, and thanks very much for the invitation, and good luck with your efforts over there in Ireland.
Thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody.